Welcome back to CIA Declassified. Most people start their day with coffee and the weather, but for the leader of the free world, breakfast comes with a side of potential extinction. We're examining the Central Intelligence Bulletin. This was the daily publication produced by the CIA from 1951 to 1974, eventually evolving into the President's Daily Brief. It contained the most sensitive intelligence on the planet. Most days it was about troop movements in Sinai or a coup in a country you couldn't find on a map. But on a few specific mornings, the CIB was a ledger of our final hours. The bulletin wasn't written for drama. It was written for cold, hard decision-making. That makes the contents even more terrifying. October 27th, 1962. Black Saturday. The CIB delivered to John F. Kennedy reported that Soviet RBM sites in Cuba were fully operational. What the bulletin didn't know, but was later declassified, was that a Soviet submarine captain had already authorized a nuclear torpedo launch, stopped only by a single officer named Vasily Arkhipov. November 1983, Able Archer, the CIA's morning reports began picking up a terrifying trend. Soviet forces in East Germany were moving to step 4 readiness. The Kremlin genuinely believed the U.S. was using a NATO exercise as a cover for a real first strike. The world was at the precipice, and for a few days the bulletin was reading like a countdown. A quote from the CIB from October 1962. The buildup continues. Photographic intelligence indicates a high state of readiness. Soviet personnel are working around the clock to finalize the guidance systems. The window for a diplomatic resolution is closing rapidly. End quote. The CIB often used probability indicators. On the worst day, the agency would estimate the likelihood of hostilities in percentages. During the Yom Kippur War in 1973, that percentage hit levels that triggered a global DEFCON 3 alert. The bulletin was printed on high-security gray paper with warning stamps in bright red. It was hand-carried by a briefed courier who had orders to destroy the document if the president's location was compromised. A quote from an internal CIA memo dated 1983. We are seeing an unprecedented level of Soviet anxiety. They have misinterpreted our exercise as a preparation for total war. The risk of a preemptive launch is at its highest since 1962. End quote. In the 1950s, the CIB reported on Project 57, a secret nuclear test that accidentally spread plutonium over a portion of Nevada. The morning brief had to explain to the president that a piece of the U.S. was now a radioactive no-go zone due to a math error. The bulletin from January 1968 reported the seizure of the USS Pueblo by North Korea. The CIA's assessment suggested that if the U.S. retaliated, the Soviet tripwire in the Pacific would likely trigger a general nuclear exchange. The agency actually had a Doomsday desk, whose only job was to monitor the red line between Washington and Moscow. If the line went dead, the CIB for that morning would have been replaced by a single pre-written emergency card. During the 1961 Berlin crisis, the bulletin reported on tank-to-tank standoffs at Checkpoint Charlie. The logs show that the CIA was tracking the literal finger movements of the Soviet tank commanders on their triggers. The Central Intelligence Bulletin of May 1967 failed to predict the exact timing of the Six-Day War, leading to an internal agency post-mortem that revamped how warning indicators were weighed in the morning reports to ensure the president was never caught off guard again. In the late 1960s, the CIB was distributed to fewer than 15 people. The super executive distribution list was designed to prevent leaks that could tip off the Soviets to exactly what the U.S. president knew at any given hour. A quote from President Lyndon Johnson: "I don't want to hear about the price of wheat in Kansas. I want to know if the Russians are going to start shooting before I finish my eggs." End quote. The bulletin once included a secret psychological profile of Nikita Khrushchev that suggested his erratic behavior in the CIB reports was a calculated madman theory tactic designed to keep American analysts in a state of constant anxiety. A declassified 1974 CIB reveals that the agency was monitoring atmospheric ionization over Soviet missile silos, believing that a sudden change in local air electricity could be a precursor to a cold launch sequence. Even today, some bulletins from the 50s and 60s come with massive black blocks. The heaviest redactions in the Able Archer files occur in the source identity sections. Speculation by historians is that the CIA had a high-ranking mole inside the Soviet general staff, someone even more placed than Oleg. The black bars likely hide the fact that our doomsday warnings were coming from someone in the room with the Soviet. This is a persistent conspiracy theory that the redactions in the CIB cover false flag proposals. Speculation suggests the CIA presented the president with plans to stage Soviet attacks on U.S. soil to justify a first strike during moments the agency thought war was inevitable. Some believe the redactions in the 1970s reports hide continuity of government locations that are still in use today. The theory is that the black bars cover the exact GPS coordinates of deep mountain bunkers that the CIA deemed survivable for the elite while the rest of the world burned. There's speculation that the red clock redactions hide a secret program called Project Ghost Signal. The theory is that the CIA had a way to trigger Soviet silos to fail electronically, and the blacked out text describes the days we actually used it to prevent a launch. Conspiracy theorists often point to the UAO, unidentified airborne object, mentions in the bulletins. Speculation holds that the CIA used these sightings as a litmus test to see if the Soviets were testing unconventional tech, and the redacted parts explain exactly what the agency found in the debris. Finally, there is speculation that some bulletins weren't written by humans. Strictly speculation, but some believe the CIA was using a primitive supercomputer in the 1960s to predict the end of the world, and the redactions hide the machine's conclusion that the end has already been simulated. There is significant speculation that the CIB redactions in 1963 hide the agency's foreknowledge of a specific coup threat within the U.S. itself. The theory is that the morning reports contained warnings about rogue elements in the military who were unhappy with the soft stance on communism. A common conspiracy theory suggests the black bars in the 1980s Able Archer files can hide the fact that the U.S. actually initiated a partial launch sequence as a bluff, and the redacted text contains the transcript of the panic inside the White House when the Soviets didn't back down immediately. Some researchers speculate that the CIB included a section on psychic intelligence. The theory is that the remote viewers were tasked with describing the contents of the Soviet premier's desk, and the redactions hide the shockingly accurate results that the agency couldn't explain through normal spying. There is speculation that the redactions in the 1954 bulletins hide the true extent of Operation Gold, the tunnel into East Berlin. Some believe the CIA was using the bulletin to feed the president the sanitized version of the intelligence, while the redacted parts hide the fact that the Soviets had already compromised the tunnel and were feeding the CIA fake data. Finally, some speculate that the final bulletin redactions hide the agency's belief in cyclical doomsday. The theory is that the CIA analysts predicted a non-political planetary catastrophe occurring every 100 years, and the redacted text discusses how the Cold War was just a distraction from an inevitable natural reset. Was the CIB a success? In the most literal sense, yes. We are still here. The bulletin's primary job was to ensure the president was never surprised into starting a nuclear war. By providing accurate cold-blooded data during the hottest moments of the Cold War, it acted as a cooling rod in the nuclear reactor. A quote from former DCI Richard Helms: "The bulletin was the only thing standing between a rational decision and a catastrophic impulse. It provided the why before someone reached for the how." End quote. The success of the bulletin is also seen in its survival. It was so essential that it survived through 5 different presidential administrations and the complete restructuring of the U.S. intelligence community. The Doomsday Ledger wasn't just paper, it drove a technological revolution. Operational breakthroughs, real-time SIGINT integration, the need for daily updates forced the CIA to develop the first automated systems for translating and summarizing Soviet radio traffic. Overhead surveillance. The bulletin's demand for current imagery led directly to the development of the U-2 spy plane and the Corona satellite program. The hotline, the data provided in the CIB proved that the lag time in communication between leaders was the biggest threat to survival, leading to the direct Moscow-Washington link and secure facsimile. The agency developed early fax technology to transmit the bulletin to the president when he was at Camp David or on Air Force One. The Central Intelligence Bulletin is a reminder that history isn't just a textbook, it's a series of mornings where the world could have ended before lunch. It's the paper trail of our narrowest escape. Thanks for listening. Next time, we go from global doomsday to a personal tragedy in a hotel room. We examine the CIA LSD suicide. In 1953, a scientist named Frank Olson plummeted from a window in New York City. For decades, it was a tragic accident, but the Declassified Internal Review tells a different story. One of MK Ultra, secret drugging, and a cover-up that reached the highest levels of the agency. Join us for the fall of the chemist. In the meantime, I'll see you in the archives.